Today, I'll be talking about the AI impact on work with Xinrong Zhu, who is an assistant professor in marketing at Imperial College London Business School. She recently co-authored and published a paper called Who is AI Replacing? The Impact on Gen AI on Online Freelancing Platforms. This fascinating paper helps to shed some light on the impact of Gen AI on jobs today. So together we discuss about the different impacts, how to rethink our careers, the impact for young professionals, how to build skills, what to focus on, what other type of actions we should take to better interact with Gen AI and protect our jobs. Hi Xinrong, it's a huge pleasure to have you today to discuss this very important and timely topic about the AI impact on work. And actually, you authored a recent paper that I found fascinating and presented and worked on with my students, which is called Who is AI Replacing? And it's focusing on freelancing job. So I wanted to start with this statement. I'm not 100% sure who said it first, but at least sometimes I attribute it to Professor Karim Lakhani from HBS. AI won't replace humans, but humans with AI will replace humans without. What do you think about this statement?
I think it's a very interesting statement. And this is actually the starting point where we started to think about our project. So, 2 years ago, I read an interesting news report that was saying after ChatGPT's introduction, so one of the first, actually, the very first AI tool that was marketed to the general public, there was a big complaint from ghostwriters in Kenya. So ghostwriters meaning these people were writing essays anonymously for students. So they were majority of them were targeting at the US markets. They were complaining after the tool was introduced, they had fewer and fewer job requests on the platform that they were working on. And they saw also the wage was declining, the number of requests were declining, and there was already some early discussion among those ghostwriters about how they can compete with this AI tool and whether there is ways to incorporate this tool into their daily work.
Yeah, so that, and then you decided basically to do it empirically, to do it very like, because for those who are not very familiar with our typical line of jobs where we focus on causality, it might be confounded, mixed with other effects, seasonality effect, just technology evolving, and to really pin down what is the effect on Gen AI, and here in particular, for example, ChatGPT and other image generation, also tools, but we'll discuss this later. You did it empirically with this research. Can you tell us more about exactly the setup of this research?
Yeah, sure. So we collected, so it's a research based on observational data. So we collected data about 1 million job posts from one of the largest freelancing platforms in the world. So on the platforms, the how do you call that? The employers would post job posts to request certain tasks to be done. And then you can imagine it's a platform, if it's a two-sided platform, where on the other side, the freelancers, the potential employees, would bid for the jobs. And the job posters, after seeing the potential employees, would choose which one to work with, right? So it's a platform that builds the connection between the supply side and the demand side. So basically, we collected the data on the demand side, on the employer's side. Okay, so in the data, we can see every day in which country or even cities, we can see the city at the city level, which employer, of course, is anonymized. We don't see the real name, but we see this employer ID. posted what specific job post. So in the job post, we see very detailed description of the requirements about the skills, about the softwares involved, if any, and about sometimes the duration, right, of the task to be done. So every day we see these posts, and then we aggregate them to create a measure for the demand for freelancing jobs. Okay, so let me clarify a little bit. Those jobs are done remotely, right? And they're smaller tasks. They're small, they're temporary, right? Compared to traditional job market that you think about, right? We get up, we go to work, that type of job. These jobs are more temporary, smaller tasks, and relatively simpler. Okay, so in the post, we can see what skill is required. For example, coding, for example, writing, right? Somebody would post, oh, I need someone to write an essay about this topic. This needs to be done in the next 3 weeks. Okay, so you can see that we see the magnitude of the demand, the nature of the demand, and how much they're willing to pay for this job, right? So we also see the maximum budget that this employer, the job poster, is willing to pay for this task, for this essentially the skill, right? Okay, so we see this panel of the demand evolving over time on this large online freelancing market.
It's worldwide. So you have supply and demand worldwide. And
Yeah.
well spread, or is it?
Yeah, so in the data, we see about 100 countries.
Mm.
After some data cleaning, we have about 60 countries. I don't exactly remember the number, but it's about 60 countries. At some point, we also did some tests between English-speaking and non-English-speaking countries. So yeah, we have a fairly big coverage of online labor market demand over time. Okay, so that's the setup, and that's the panel data set we see, right? We also see potentially the same employer posting different jobs over time, right? So you can imagine before AI and post AI and after AI, right? There might be behavioral changes in how I demand jobs to be done, and we can observe that in the data. Okay, so that's the setting. And the first step we set out to do is we want to understand this question, whether and how much the generative AI tool changed the demand on freelancing, online freelancing jobs. So one way to understand that is to aggregate the data, right? So from the daily level to monthly level, and then we do essentially a differences model to control for confounding factors, as you have already mentioned, seasonal changes. Seasonal changes is actually very, very big in the online freelancing market, because you can imagine individual employers or even companies would have seasonal demand for certain jobs, especially when we're talking about these more temporary, not long-term, but short-term jobs that needs to be done in response to the market demand, for example, right? So seasonality is one thing we wanted to control for. Some other factors, like different countries might have different, evolvement, right, of job market demand. We also wanted to control for existing time trend. For example, you might be wondering, oh, is the online job market already declining before the ChatGPT or in general, more generative AI tools were introduced?
Mm-hmm.
If that's already happening, then what we capture is the labor market trend, not the effect of the AI, right? So we wanted to control for all these confounding factors and get to the causal impact of ChatGPT and image generating AI tools that we also study in the paper.
Mhm. And just to also to clarify to the audience, so basically the way you do this, so you mentioned the technical term difference in difference, is that basically you compare a treated group, here the jobs that are clearly exposed deeply to these tools, and jobs that are arguably less exposed or not exposed. And could you tell us a bit more, how do you define this? Which are the jobs we can expect that they will not be exposed? Because then it acts as we call it, a counterfactual, just to be sure that everybody understands. It's basically
Yeah.
these jobs will be still affected by seasonality on these job markets, job platforms, but not by the Gen AI tool. And it allows to measure this difference, hence the name difference in difference, between the jobs who are exposed to Gen AI and those who are arguably not so exposed or not exposed at all. So which jobs will not be exposed, for example?
Yeah, very good question. So the jobs that we think, so we did a few different approaches to classify the jobs into the control group, which is less exposed to the AI tools at that time. Okay, so let's clarify a little bit more, right? Because AI tools are evolving every day, right? What we see today are very different from what we saw 1 year ago of how the AI and what AI could do. So the time frame that we were looking at was from July 2022 to July 2023. And ChatGPT was introduced in November 2022. As we all know, ChatGPT went through a lot of stages, right, of development, and it became more and more powerful in some sense. But within that time frame, right, there were certain tasks that ChatGPT was still not able to do. That was our starting point. Okay, from our common sense, from what we understood about the tool, from our own daily experience, there might be some jobs or essentially some skills that ChatGPT was not still at the place to substitute completely. So those jobs we title as manual intensive jobs. So jobs that need a lot of manual work to complete, right? For example, data management, office management, audio and video services. Okay, we know that ChatGPT today or Perplexity and other tools today would be able to do those tasks better at more efficient, more efficiently. But at that time, within the time framework that we were studying, right, those tools didn't seem to adapt to those tasks yet. So that was our starting point. We thought, okay, these might be the skills, the manual intensive jobs might be the skills that the AI tools were not able to efficiently work on. So then we looked into existing papers. We also looked into some industry reports. As I mentioned, the news about ghostwriters in Kenya, right, to see which types of skills are more exposed or less exposed to AI tools. So we found several very interesting and very impactful papers already published or were at the working paper stage. So two of them were by Felton et al. And they had this paper about AI exposure measure. So what we call AIOE measure in our paper. We cited them extensively in our paper to justify our classification. So what they did is it's essentially a survey method. So they asked from a list of skills, 100 or so skills, they asked people to rate these skills and how much they think the skill is exposed to AI tools. And then if you think of jobs as a combination of different skills, right? Professors or teachers must have 5 different skills: communication, analytics, blah, 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 right? Then you aggregate these skills, the exposure summarizes how much certain job is exposed to AI tools. So we relied on that exposure measure, and then we classified our job posts into the treated groups and the control groups. So the treated groups is what we call automation-prone jobs. Mm-hmm. So jobs, very, very intuitively the name, right? Jobs that are prone to automation. So for example, we have writing, coding, mm-hmm. right? So remember in the job post, we also see the requirements. So we can easily filter out job posts that require specifically coding in MATLAB, in Python, in C, right? In all these different software, okay? And engineering, that's the other type of jobs that is classified into automation-prone jobs. So engineering, meaning we see a lot of requirements for coding. For example, people were asking if there is anybody who's proficient in MATLAB that can design, I don't know, an electric system for them, right? So those types of jobs, we call them automation-prone jobs.
And usually, for example, the engineering will be used, we'll talk about this later because it's a central aspect of the AI impact on jobs, but also in your paper, it's about the different level of skills, right? Engineering were also qualified, but maybe I'm wrong, in your paper as potentially higher skilled or not.
Yeah. So definitely the complexity of the jobs matters. We were looking into, so the guidance was coding. If there is a job that specifically asked for coding, right, then we say it's more prone to automation.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so maybe because, again, I know well the results, but could you share it with us, basically the punchline, the main results, the main finding after this setting of this?
Yeah, so hopefully the setting is clear, right? We compared the treatment group with the control group. And then basically we take differences between these groups in terms of the demand change over time on the platform. Okay, so the seasonality, you can think of the seasonality being affecting both groups more or less in the same way. And so if we take the difference, right, that seasonality is going to cancel out between the groups. So the treatment timing, so in the study, we had several different treatments. One is ChatGPT introduction, and the other one is image generating AI introduction. Okay, so let me first talk about the ChatGPT introduction. So if we compare after ChatGPT and before ChatGPT, the job requirements, so let me call it demand, okay? The demand for automation-prone jobs decreased by about 20% more than the manual intensive jobs, okay? After ChatGPT's introduction.
And the pay? Is there also an effect on the pay on this job posting?
Yeah, so we also looked into the willingness to pay and the payment, right? So just to clarify, this is how you are willing to pay, right? We're not looking at the equilibrium job outcome. Yeah. Mm-hmm. This is the demand.
Yes.
This is how much in maximum you're likely to pay for this type of jobs. And also another clarification is by looking at the pay, we're looking at employers who stayed on the platform after ChatGPT. There might be employers after the ChatGPT introduction substitute entirely out from the platform, and they're not on the platform anymore posting the job posts. We can imagine their willingness to pay is even lower than we observe in the data, right? Okay, so think of this as a subset of the entire world. Of the employers who still remain on the platform, we actually see an increase of their willingness to pay for the jobs that still remained on the platform.
But
The magnitude,
is it driven by the selection? Basically, if you look at the average value of the willingness to pay, just because you lose basically the lowest pay, they disappear, so the average is going up, or is it because actually those jobs are now more valued? You see what I mean? For example, the remaining job are now we want to pay them at a higher price.
yeah, that's very interesting. And we did look into that. Selection could be one of the factors. So by selection, you meant employers who stayed on the platform are essentially somewhat different from people who substitute away from the platform and embraced AI tools.
Yeah, for example, or just the fact that's basically the way you see the average, you see the average in the post period going up, and there could be two reasons for this. Either the remaining job for similar job before, now do you value them more? You're ready to pay more for this remaining job, or
Mm-hmm.
the average could go up just because you get rid of jobs that were with a very low pay before. I was just
Yeah.
curious what's of the two, maybe the two, or what of the two, which one is driving this effect?
Yeah, very interesting. We did dig into that. So we saw that there was a 5% increase in the willingness to pay. And we looked into the nature of the jobs that are remained on the platform after AI tools. And we found that the complexity of the jobs increased by about 3%. So how do we measure complexity of the jobs? We had a lot of discussions about that. Eventually, we decided to use the unique number of skills in each job post. Okay. So on this
Yeah.
platform, when you post a job, you have to specify, you not have to, right? But if you opt to, you can specify the the skills, sorry. All right. So if it's a very simple job, it only involves one skill. For example, if I want to write an essay, want to have somebody to write an essay for me, and this essay is about just one simple topic, right? I don't know how to plant a tree in the spring. I will only say writing as a skill. Now, if I have a more complex job, for example, I want to write an essay in a foreign language about, as you said, engineering, right? A very complex topic. Then I will specify different skill tags. Writing and the language, right? Translation, and then engineering. So we believe that by calculating the number of skill tags of each job post, it's a proxy for the complexity of the job. And so it kind of corroborates what you were contemplating at, right? So the jobs that are left on the platform seemed to become more complex. So what might be happening is with the AI tool, some people knew how to do certain things better and more efficiently. And those certain things might be simpler tasks. For example, my first example, writing an essay about how to plant a tree in the spring. right? Those people might leave the platform, and hence what we see the complaints from the ghostwriters about, oh, I'm not getting any jobs anymore, right? But then there are still some job requirements that involve more complex skills. Like
Mhm.
my second example, they will still remain in the platform, and the willingness to pay was turned out to be higher after the AI tools. Yeah.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
that's part of the story, I believe.
I see. It's interesting. It echoes. I did some not really 100% rigorous, but some analysis on Stack Overflow before and after the release of
Mm,
ChatGPT. And one of the results is going in this direction that the remaining questions were indeed of higher quality, so better documented, but also more complex. And basically, you see that, which is often what we see with Gen AI revolution, is that indeed you can substitute and give basically mundane, repetitive, routine tasks and
yeah.
focus more on more complex, cognitively intensive, multidimensional tasks. And this is something we'll discuss afterwards when we open a bit more the discussion after the research, once we fully know the results. But this is the good side eventually, is that you can
Yeah.
focus on things that matters, that are more exciting. It's the same when the ATM arrived in the US. Like bank tellers were very worried to lose their jobs, but actually what happened in the US is that they started to
Mm,
hire more and more bank tellers because the cost for opening a new branch was reduced, and now the bank tellers could focus on something where they had a competitive advantage compared to the ATM, the machine. And that was more interesting. So counting money is not so exciting. Humans are not very efficient at this compared to machine. And now you can focus on counseling, which is a richer, where you really have this human advantage of human connection, this very cognitive, complex task. So we might see this, but Gen AI still is a very different technology. So I'm looking forward
yeah.
to discussing more about this. Also, you mentioned early that you looked at difference between English and non-English speaking countries. Is it in the paper? I can't remember.
Yeah, no, it didn't end up in the paper. We didn't see much
Okay.
difference between the two. Our hypothesis, one of the possible explanations might be people would be using VPN to access ChatGPT. At least
Ah.
I know a lot of my friends back in my hometown, where it's in China, that they were using VPN to access ChatGPT. So
Mhm.
we didn't include that in the paper. The direction, though, of the results, although it's not statistically significant, still suggests that in the English-speaking countries, the effect was bigger.
Mhm.
But it's not statistically
Yeah.
significant, let me be clear. So that's why we didn't include in
Okay.
the paper.
Yeah,
Yeah.
plus the measurement errors, because it's hard to know due to the VPN. And I think it's non-classical measurement errors because basically for some reason it's not random, right, that you use the VPN. So it's
Ah, yeah.
a very
Mm-hmm.
interesting point. And also, I mean, you mentioned this for image generation, because now we can see it was early version, right? Because
It
you
was early,
refer
yeah.
to like DALI. I'm not sure the model, but it was back in September 2022, slightly before
Mm-hmm.
ChatGPT 3.5 and Midjourney, and already they were quite powerful, but we have seen now how easy it is to prompt and the increased quality with the recent result and release from OpenAI. But you also found quite some interesting impacts on image generation tasks, right?
Yes. So there we find the magnitude of the decline to be about 17%. So we were looking at, let me see, I have my paper open here on the screen. So the specific AI technologies we were looking at for image generating were DALI 2, Midjourney, and Stable Diffusion, which were introduced between July and September 2022. But those were really, as you said, very early versions of image generating AI. Yes, we still see such a big decline. And also, I want to emphasize here, the decline was almost immediate,
Hmm.
right? So you put a vertical line at the treatment time, which is um, July to September 2022. The decline was right after the introduction, right? So we have confidence that this is attributable to the image generating AI tools. So that's one thing I wanted to further emphasize. So the immediate response, which I think is different from older generations of technologies that we have seen, like computers or even telephones. Another interesting fact is this decline was also very persistent.
Hmm.
So, of course, we were only looking at very short-term impact, right? We have about 8 month post period for ChatGPT, but this decline we saw in the data was did never recovered. Okay, so it was always stayed low like that. Um, so our so in the review process, as you know, for publishing papers, we have to go through different editing phases. People were interested in how does your short-term impact speak to the long-term impact? We so there is the data limitation. We didn't collect data further beyond July 2023, but what we did is we divided the post period. So remember, we have 8 months, right?
Hmm.
We divided them into three months, okay? And then we estimate our model for these 3 months, okay? So econometrically speaking, we were putting individual indicator variables for each of the 3 months. We saw that the decline was gradual, but deeper and deeper. So in the beginning, it was about 10% decrease, and then later it was 20% decrease.
Hmm. Yeah, so
So
it's
that's the
yeah.
second, yeah, that's the second point I wanted to also highlight about this impact, which is, we didn't see any sign of recovery. Yes, you can argue that there might still be some seasonality. Maybe in summer, people were going on vacation, they were posting less jobs, but the decline in summer 2023 was much deeper than what we saw in
Mhm.
2022.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I see. And also, I mean, it's very interesting because image generation is something I really see in the wild. I go to the train station and often I take picture because I see huge billboards, really professional things, and you
Yeah,
clearly see it's fully generated by AI. And I always wonder, does the client knows? I mean, because maybe the client is actually doing it they are maybe doing it themselves and didn't require the help, or maybe it's someone else who just used AI and Gen AI to create these pictures, and the client is clueless. I always wonder which
yeah,
one is it of the two, but clearly it's impressive how it's pervasive. I've seen last time it was really one of the major retail shop in Switzerland, and they use for their official branding, official pictures instead of stock photos. You can clearly see that it was fully AI generated. And I was really shocked. I
yeah.
was surprised.
Yeah, tell me about it. Some of my friends were making money from the image generating AI tools. And in fact, about your question, the question about whether the client could tell
Mhm.
if the image were generated by the machine or by human beings, there was a recent study that looked into that exact point. So their setting is in the customer, basically marketing world, where you have a lot of companies generating those images for their customers, right? It's an experimental setting. So they asked people how they felt about the images generated by the AI tools and how much they believed or trusted the company afterwards. right? And they were seeing some impact, so negative impact, if people knew that the image was generated by by the machine. So I think there is a fine line here, right, for the companies to think about. On the one hand, is the cost saving or the efficiency of doing things, right, which is good for their business model. On the other hand, whether you're losing the customer's trust on your brand, whether you're eventually hurting your brand image, that's something, you have to trade off, right? One is short-term gain, the other one might be some long-term harm, right? So
Yeah,
there is
this is
some
central. Sorry,
interesting
please.
working, sorry, there is some interesting working progress on this.
So I 100% agree, and you really highlight something that is central with the AI impact. Often, or at least we can imagine, that short term is different from long term, and you have a
Mm,
lot of shortcuts and things typically cutting costs. You're more productive, efficient on the short term. But what might happen on the long term, and actually that's one of the main goals of this podcast, is try to understand this, because we all experience the short term effects. Like I can code way faster. I can go very fast through research articles, through long reports, and many things that I can automate. But what will be the effect 5 years from now on myself, but also on other? And in particular, I always think about my students, on young professionals who didn't yet had the opportunity to wrestle with the data, with their skills, with what they want to learn, to really deeply acquire the knowledge. What will happen on the capacity to learn, to really get expertise on these different skills? And this is where I'm a bit more, or let's say way more cautious and even worried about the long-term effect.
yeah. So about this point about the skills, um, what we also so in the data, we also saw that there was an increase in the requirements for using ChatGPT. So we also looked into the job requirements of the job posts, and we did some text analysis essentially to kind of filter out the job posts that were asking for AI tool efficiency or proficiency, right? So I wanted somebody who can do this task with some ChatGPT knowledge. So
Mhm.
we saw an increase. That's very interesting to us because that indicates that there might be some dynamic changes on the demand side of the job market, right? People are more and more aware of the power of AI tools, and they wanted the employees to be able to use these tools efficiently and in a smart way. And we also see that predominantly these requirements are in the automation prone jobs, especially the coding type of jobs.
Mhm.
That's about 80% of job posts that are
Which, wow. Yeah, yeah. So
in this category. Yeah.
So it's really what we often see with technological shocks. It's creative destruction, right? You create and you destroy at the same time. Some jobs become obsolete, but you create new skills. And we see, I mean, the number of experts on Gen AI that are flourishing every day, sometimes a bit heroically or abusively, but still, you still have a lot of more jobs that have been created within companies, but also for our freelancing job, I guess. So it's indeed a good illustration of this, but also about skills. What's the impact? Because we always discuss also this, and it's not clear if it will help more skilled worker or lower skilled worker. And
Mm.
what do you see in the paper, and what do you think about this heterogeneity?
Yeah, that's also very interesting. So the quality of the job that people provides and the heterogeneous impact on lower skilled workers versus higher skilled workers, right? In our paper, because we didn't have the data on the supply side meaning the employee side, we only had data on the demand side, which is our research question. We didn't delve deeper into the impact on the employees of AI tools. But I think there are maybe two papers that I'm aware of when I was writing the paper and doing some literature review. There was a concurrent working paper as we were working on our project, which also had, so let me try to think. They had the supply side data on freelancing platform. So they were also looking at freelancing platforms, but they were more focusing on the freelancers.
Mm-hmm.
And they were mainly focusing on the writers. So freelancers who were providing writing skills. What they found is, interestingly, the lower skilled, so the lower wage freelancers were benefiting from the AI tool. Their compensation, so their income, increased after the AI tool introduction. So then the wage gap between the high wage and the low wage group actually were shrinking after the AI tool introduction. So in their paper, they attribute this effect to the AI, right? I think that kind of speaks to your question about how the AI will affect the inequality in the job market, right? In terms of either the pay or their skills. So that's one paper that I'm aware of. Another one I think was also interesting, which studied customer support agents. So think about a marketing company that used the chatbot to help their employers to communicate with their customers. Okay, so it's a randomized design. So they randomized some workers into the treatment group, which have the AI tool to help them. So I think I don't exactly remember the experimental design. So either the treated employees had some scripts provided by the ChatGPT or the AI tools, or they had access to ChatGPT. So either one of the two, but they had some help from the AI. The other group, which is the control group, didn't have any AI access. They were comparing the efficiency of the job, right? So, for example, how many times they were able to answer the customers' questions and the quality, the feedback from the customers after they exposed the two groups with different access. There, they also found that there was an equality effect of the AI. So the AI tools narrowed the gaps between the higher skilled and lower skilled workers. So that's, I think, another piece of supportive evidence about how AI might help equalizing the workforce in terms of their skills and the quality of the work they can provide.
But indeed, and the skills required. So it's really interesting because I would honestly have thought, in particular for Gen AI, not generally with technology, but really for Gen AI, that it will rather destroy some low-skilled work and affect negatively in the sense of destructing this low-skilled work, in particular because I've seen and I've heard in, for example, consulting company, if I'm not mistaken, McKinsey has now a junior GPT. Basically, it's replicating the junior task with a Gen AI tool. And I thought, just what will be the impact? Now, do you still need a junior or not? or is it also helping the junior to be more efficient? And with this piece of evidence, it seems that it could be the former, the later, right? It helps the junior, lower skilled worker to be more efficient and still be very helpful instead of completely replacing them. Because I will think the same actually in academia. What will happen with research assistants? Do you need
Yeah,
more research assistants? Or because I'm using Gen AI daily. I have also
me too. Yeah.
a good team of TAs now because I started doing research, but before research assistant. And I was just thinking, what will happen with this type of work that is so important to build the skills, that is so important to construct the workforce. You really need these people to do all these tasks and to build the skills. So yeah, it's
Yeah. Yeah,
impressive.
let me also build on your thoughts. I think it's those are very interesting thoughts. I I can provide two more examples mm, related with my daily experience, right? The one is at Imperial, they recently introduced this avatar for every professor. Of course, it's not mandatory. You can voluntarily do that. And they launched this first in an online um, MBA course. Okay. So, by design, that course is done online and it's all remote. And for a long time, the program team got the complaints from the students. We don't have much interaction with the professors, right? Because we don't have classroom time. And so they invented this avatar, which is kind of an interesting but kind of weird concept. So they took our image and our video recording in the classroom, and also our curriculum, the class materials. If you want, you can also provide some email examples, okay, to this AI, and then it generates an AI version of me. This AI version never goes offline, 24/7, right? So whenever students have also, by the way, this is an online global MBA program. So there is naturally the time difference, right?
True.
The real professor is sleeping, but the avatar is still online and answering questions from students in Australia, for example, right? Super productive. And amazingly, after the program was finished this year, right, the students' feedback was much more positive than before. And a lot of students were mentioning this AI avatar being helpful to their study. Um, for example, they might have questions about the study, about the exam, more or less standard questions, which would take a lot of time for professors to answer, but not very productive, right, in terms of real learning process. All those questions can be delegated to the avatar.
Mhm.
So that's one thing. And then another thing that I wanted to also mention is about the research. As you mentioned, you have a lot of RAs, and the natural question is whether this AI, which is so good in coding and everything, will replace the RAs. My thinking for now, I think it's no, because let's let's think about the nature of doing research, right? It's essentially a creative process. And a lot of question doesn't have a yes or no answer. But AI tools tend to give you a yes and no answer, right? Which I think sometimes counteract the natural process of doing research.
Mhm.
I don't know if you agree. Sometimes I see in my PhD students, you know, instead of sitting back and researching by themselves, looking into papers, looking into, I don't know, real life reports, as I mentioned, news report to look for research questions, to look for answers. They now go directly to AI, right? And ask the questions. And then they get the same answers.
Yeah.
Everybody gets the same answer. And then it's just counter, I don't know, counteracting the learning process. So I think for now, at least, I don't see a lot of like 100% potential for AI tools to replace the entire research or learning process.
Mhm.
Another thing is, in terms of coding, I still think that human beings should be the ones to monitor the coding process, right? AI tools, they can generate the code, but sometimes the code is not what you want in your specific setting. Especially if there is a very complicated model you want to solve, the AI will give you the standard answer, right? Just as the first example, yes or no, right? What type of research questions? Um, Here, the code still needs to be adapted to your own research setting and the question you're trying to answer.
So lots of fascinating points. I just took notes. I'll try to react to each of those, but in the inverse order with the last one you mentioned. So about the code, it's very interesting because in my consulting part of my job, I I was working with this startup who was in marketing actually and selling some products using some fancy AI tools. And it was completely wrong. Like what they were doing, they asked me to basically monitor and double check and suggest improvement. And I was like, no, but you should throw everything away. And the thing is, what happened and what is the connection with what we're discussing here is that you can generate code easily, but they completely fail to understand because you have no bug. The code is flawless, but it's not because it's run that it's correct. It was the wrong model, basically the wrong
Mm.
specification, the answering completely incorrectly to the answer, but you get an answer. And that was a huge issue. And I think with coding, that might be an issue. On one side, it's making it more available, but on the other, you might have more and more of these issues. The second is that it was with someone who came on this podcast as well, who had exactly this example about innovation, about diversity of thought. Basically, he was giving case studies, business case studies to their students for the last 10 years. And it was
Mm.
always real business case studies. And students had to come back in class and say, we vote for A for solution A or for solution B. There was usually a choice for these business owners. Last 10 years, always a debate. He's doing this year, two different class, international students. 100% of the two classes answered the same thing. And he froze. He was completely in shock. What happened? And after thinking, he just asked, but did you use ChatGPT? And 90% of the people raised their hand. And it completely homogenized, killed the debate, killed thought
Mhm.
diversity. And the most fascinating part is that here you don't have a right answer. It's, as you said with research, you have to explore other paths. You have to go in some direction. And if you want real breakthrough, you really in innovation, I mean, in the business, in academia, you need to find these very different pathways. So if everything is standardized in one direction, we might miss many. And if you start with ChatGPT, it's so convincing, it's so well written that you might
Yes.
start to basically just convince yourself, well, it's got a point, and you start in one direction instead of just spending some time in this void, in this mud, fighting with your thoughts, going outside and running before you have new ideas. And I think that's also something about innovation, about thought diversity, about debates that is worrying me a bit, and where I think we should also stand back a bit sometimes from Gen AI.
Yeah, yeah. In my classrooms, I try to encourage students not to use ChatGPT in the class when we were discussing cases. For example, I would just show them a slide of a real world business questions, right?
Mhm.
Business example, and ask them to just vote based on your understanding, based on your intuition, based on your thoughts. Show me your hands, which one. And I always get very diverse answers. And sometimes I'm amused by how creative students are. And I think human brain works this way, right? You don't prone them to a certain way. And I think that's where, we need to be very careful about the applications of AI. Going back to about 10 minutes ago when we were discussing this equalizing effect of AI tools, we were discussing examples in writing, examples in customer reports. Those are very standard, very repetitive types of jobs. Those are by no means creative jobs, right? I can give you another example, which is about Google Translate. So you can think of that as an early version of AI as well, and the insights could be applied to today. That study looked into the effect of Google Translate on human translators. Again, the demand effect, if there is replacement, and if so, how much? They did find overall there was a declining trend after Google Translate on the human translators. But if we look more carefully, deeper into different types of translation jobs, you see very different effects. So I think that's very interesting. In their paper, they pointed out for translating jobs that involve emotion, for example, translating a poet or translating a very scientific article, the effect is much smaller than a very standard translation.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we need to be careful on which types of jobs we delegate the AI. And I think also speaking to one of your points before, in modern lives, right, especially in business world, everybody is talking about money, talking about time, efficiency, speed. And that's dangerous, I think, in some way, if we apply this mindset to the AI tool. Because the AI tool will prone you to one direction very fast, right? Maybe the direction is wrong. Maybe the direction is not optimal. Maybe the direction actually hinders creative thinking and more careful assessment of the problem without you understanding or realizing this downside.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's kind of, I'm also a bit worried about this, like the pitfall of the AI tools.
Mm-hmm. So that's also something that I witnessed online. It was actually a young scholar who asked about the order of the author, and the young scholar on LinkedIn shared that they basically wrote the whole paper, did the whole analysis, and like really did tons of work. And at some point, he just suggested about being the first author, and because the senior just said that basically he will be third or fourth, I don't remember exactly, just arguing, well, I did all these things, and the senior person just answered, but ChatGPT can write as well. And I think it was, well, of course, it was a very violent answer, very toxic behavior. But I think this is the very dark side, is if you focus just on speed and you now basically take the speed of Gen AI tools as the baseline. Some stuff, in particular in research, but also in work, when you want to, outside academia, when you want quality, innovation, some stuff takes time. And I mean, research, again, it takes place also in business settings. You have to spend time thinking, failing, exploring pathways, closing these pathways. Those are not failure. It's really necessary. All the pathway in research, for example, when you go in one direction and you stop it, are very valuable. And I think this will be a very scary part, is if now we take the baseline of the speed of doing something as the speed of these Gen AI tools. I think we will lose a lot of creativity, innovation.
Yeah, exactly. There, especially in the scientific world, there are a lot of trials and errors. You learn from the mistakes. Inside the business world as well, right? You learn from your mistakes and you learn from talking to other people. And now you only talk to AI. and you're thinking about replacing your workers with the AI entirely. I think that's a wrong approach. But it's also very, how do you say that, attractive
Hmm.
to a lot of business owners when they think about how to improve the productivity, how to improve the efficiency of things, right? Human beings are prone to convenience, right? They're prone to less efforts, less work.
Hmm.
And AI is good at producing good results.
Good enough.
Yeah, good enough results and seemingly good results,
Mhm.
right?
True.
I mean, with the evolvement of the tools, nowadays we know, the Perplexity would give you where the sources are, but how many times do people check all the sources? They give you the websites, but who checks? I don't know. I don't know how many people check. That's why I always tell my RA, my PhD students to double check, to confirm the information, and also to record your prompt. The way you prompt AI is actually becoming a science. And we were joking among our colleagues that there will be a master program in how to use ChatGPT. I think instead of, let's just go and replace all the workers or let's just ban ChatGPT, all these extreme thoughts are not the right way to go. But instead, we should think about how we, you know, smartly work with this tool, right? Which areas should we delegate the tool to? And which
Mhm.
areas should we still remain in control? I got a lot of questions from my friends or even family members. They knew about the research I was doing and they were curious. Okay, in 10 years of time, what should I tell my children to do
Mhm.
to be able
Exactly.
to find jobs, to be able to find jobs, to be able to, essentially live in this world with the robots, with the AI tools in the future,
So what will
right?
be your advice for young professional, for for students, basically, and anyone, but let's start with young people who have to build their career and where they will grow and get skills in a world where AI is probably keep moving forwards, improving. What will be your advice to young professional to basically think about their work and how to protect their work, what kind of skills they should focus on?
Yeah, I think definitely taking a dynamic view, a learning mindset is important, and that's the basic, right? Don't get very comfortable with the tool. By comfortable, I mean just 100% trusting what the tool gives you without verifying, without confirming, without adding your own thoughts, right? Even before using the tool, you need to decide which topics you want to ask ChatGPT and which topics you want to do your own research, make your own efforts, and learn by yourself. I think that's the first thing, learning how to use the tool.
Mhm.
Okay. In my class, I never ban ChatGPT or any AI tools. I just tell them, use it wisely. You're an adult. You decide when to use it, how to use it, and document. It's your responsibility to document how you use the tool and how you evaluate the work. Think of it as your research assistant. And the way you evaluate human work should be the same as you evaluate the AI work, right? Think of it as complementary to your productivity instead of a replacement.
Mhm.
Yes, you can replace repetitive, small work, temporary work, as we saw in the research paper. Yes, you can do that. And by freeing up the time wasted on repetitive work, you can devote your efforts to more creative, more constructive work.
Mhm.
For example, with writing, right? I admit that I use Perplexity AI to revise my writing, but I never ask an AI tool to start writing an essay for me. I never do that. I want to retain control of what I want to say and what I perceive other people, right, will expect me to say. You know what I mean? So
Mhm.
I want to take control of the piece of work that will eventually present, right? And then I might ask ChatGPT to revise the wording, to revise the language, right? To make it more coherent, for example. So I think that's the first thing to do. It's, how we can think deeper about what human beings are unique,
Mhm.
right? Comparative advantage between human beings and AI tools. What can we still do? What is our advantage, right? Compared to the AI tools at our hands, and how we can combine these two and cooperate together. So
Yeah.
I think that's the first thing that I would like, my students at least to master in their study and in also their future career. When I talk to, family members or friends, and they were asking, oh, what types of jobs are more likely to be replaced and what types of jobs will be remaining, there is another aspect which I haven't talked about. I think jobs related with emotional support are also less likely to be replaced, or artwork. I don't know if you agree with me. It's only my personal
Mhm.
opinion. But fundamentally, what is AI tools? It's built on large language models, right? It's learning from text, it's learning from the existing information, or even other AI models, right? To predict what's going to happen afterwards. It's not learning from human emotion. Yes, it's learning from the text, but text is a reflection of emotions. Different emotions might generate the same text. So I think the AI tools are at the position to learn from the texts exactly what types of emotions behind the text.
And beyond this, I mean, one of the
Mm-hmm.
main thing where I 100% agree where that can't
Mm-hmm.
be replaced is the human connection. I mean, let's say with art, I had this debate because I was really shocked and disappointed and sad about the Ghiblification, basically, because for me, Hayao Miyazaki and the Ghibli studio was very important in my childhood, teenage years. I loved these movies. I was inspired. It made me dreams. And basically, I think then people would say, but if you see one picture, can you tell if it's from this or not? And I say, even if I can't, it's important to know. It's important to know if you have a, a piece of art of a, so the person will take this example, right? He said, well, but you had these people who copy very famous art piece perfectly well.
Mm,
Even experts cannot tell the difference. And once the owner realized that it was a copy, it's worthless and they don't want it anymore. And the
yeah.
person was like, does it make sense? And I was, of course it makes sense. Because the story behind has value. I mean, if, for example, my father offered me something, and it's maybe, I don't know, it's a knife. It's a cooking knife. He was a chef and it's a cooking knife. I will attach a lot of value and emotional connection to this knife. I can buy exactly the same knife in a shop, but it won't be the same. It won't have the same value. There is
Yeah.
a clear emotional attachment to the human connection. With art, it's also with respect to the imagining that exactly someone lived some emotion that only humans can live and put these emotions onto a canvas. And that's beautiful. And
Yes.
that's what is touching. That's what's unique. That's a big part of the value. You can copy this with AI. You can create stuff that I will not be able to distinguish if it's AI made or not, but that doesn't matter. if you, in my opinion, because you have the value of the story behind that cannot be replaced. And when we think about our careers, that's typically something that I think for myself. That's why I am actually doing so much keynotes, workshops, trainings in person
Hmm.
and sometimes remotely as well. But because there is this human connection, I love to enter in a room, to see the people, to empathize with where they stand with the knowledge. If they are lost because it's too complex, bored because it's going not fast enough, and just connecting on the human level, I think that's something that we won't be able to replace, hopefully, and that we should
Yeah,
still value a lot. So
yeah,
that's typically one advice when I think about career is still thinking about this type of things that hopefully we won't accept to replace. While
yeah.
for the emotional support and mental, basically I just filmed this podcast and released it last week about mental health, the Gen AI on mental health, and it's a long story, but how you can use it eventually to help. And this is actually connected to one of the things you mentioned with the avatar in Imperial School. It's available
Mm,
24/7 and it's always patient. And this might be one of our limitations, sure, in some situation. I mean, if you are distressed due to mental health issues, it's 2 a.m., you have nobody to reach out. These tools are always available and always patient. And in some circumstances, without at any point saying that you should replace any human interaction with this, in the same way that the avatar at Imperial School College sounds interesting, is that it's not preventing any interaction with the professor. It's rather when it's not possible physically or live, you have a substitution that is interesting and valuable.
interesting. Yeah, that updates my prediction actually. Yeah, but I totally agree with the social connection part. And I think deep down, right, human beings are social animals. And there is a lot of information, a lot of clues, right, that are communicated outside language where AI tools are trained on, right? There is the value that you talked about behind the art piece. There is also trust, authority, right? Can you imagine an AI would replace a president that has
Mhm.
control over nuclear power, right? Also in our data, we saw that there are some lawyers' jobs that are not replaced because still human society functions based on common trust of authority to
Mhm.
some extent, right? You want to finish a house transaction, the last step is to go through some legal process, right? So I think that also is a unique aspect of the nature of jobs that might not be replaced. But of course, it's built on this existing society foundation,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Human beings are social animals. Human beings have a kind of hierarchical society order. Certain things need to be done in certain ways. Doctors, for example, right? I always go to one dentist, not necessarily because this dentist is better, but because I have been with him or her for a long time, and there is nice emotional interaction.
Mhm.
You can imagine in 10 years of time, there is maybe a robot that can do your teeth cleaning, that can do your filling very efficiently. But still, I would trust my dentist
Mhm.
because human judgment there is still valuable. And so
Mhm.
the interaction, right, component of your job is also kind of important.
Mhm. So circling back before concluding, maybe to the initial statements, indeed, it seems from all the piece of evidence that we have seen that so far you still require, and there is still some human AI interaction. It's not entirely substituted to AI, it's rather or automated entirely. It's still controlled at some points by a human. Image generation, maybe it's not a freelancer who will generate the image, maybe it's someone an intern within the company, but it's still a human who is doing this. If I think about the TAs, I really still need them desperately because it's a very multidimensional task. So maybe they will use Gen AI to translate some LaTeX slides, and I'm perfectly fine with this and encourage them to do this, and then just double check, but also upload the slides, be sure that the language is adequate for the students, connected to other part of the classes. All these things usually will still require for the moment human supervision. So maybe one last question for you. As AI is evolving, it's evolving fast. You captured with your paper very important effects of large magnitude, reduction of 20%, 17% of job posting in certain things. What do you think about the future? Where are we going? Are you more hopeful or fearful?
I think I'm on the hopeful side. Yeah. So we've been, let me be very clear, right? So the effect that we found in the paper is specific to the online freelancing platform. You might say 20%, wow, that's so big. In five years, it's going to be completely gone, right? But it's very specific to that setting, which means it's a setting that's predominantly involving temporary job that is not very well regulated. If you think about the difference between, freelancing jobs and our conventional daily jobs, right, corporate jobs, those jobs are temporary. They're not protected by formal contracts. That's why we can see a lot of short-term impact. Now, can we see that in the real life? Can we just, derive the same insights? Well, part of it, yes, right? It's informative. It is suggestive of the impact of the power of AI to replace human labor. But again, there are other aspects we need to think about. There are government, there is policy, regulation, which I think is fairly lagging behind now, given how fast AI tool is advancing, right? So policy regulation needs to also pick up to protect labor or human work. That's one thing that was, not in our empirical setting, but in the real world. Another thing is managers. I think managers also have to play a very important role here in deciding or guiding the use of AI. The most efficient way of using AI with less impact on the employees. Be responsive and be responsible. Here, very transparent communication with your workers, clear guidelines of using the AI tools, right? Not only providing them the access, but also helping them to use the AI tools efficiently in their daily job. I think that's also an important component that was not in the online freelancing setting. Another component, which was suggested by our finding, is it opens opportunities, right? This is not new to this technology. We saw that with other, older technologies like computer, internet. It opens opportunities. In our setting, in our results, we saw that there was an increase in job complexity. Specifically, there was an increase in the requests for using ChatGPT, right? So it opens a lot of other doors for improving the job quality, the work quality, improving the outcomes of lower waged workers, of lower skilled workers, improving and closing the gaps among different workers. And it has the potential to make the workplace a healthier, a more productive workplace. Yeah. So I think these 3 points combined, that's why I feel more hopeful or optimistic. Yeah.
Yeah, so overall, for sure, if you want to think about Gen AI impact and AI in general impact on work, it's important to learn these tools to be sure that you're not replaced by someone who knows these tools within your job line. You can still decide what you want to automate, allowing you to potentially automate boring tasks where you don't learn much and focus actually, allowing you to learn more, to improve in more cognitive intensive creative tasks. And
Yeah.
also, we can expect policymakers to help to regulate the market, to protect some jobs, to help train, to help change careers if needed. And I think the last thing that we discuss also that I want to add in this conclusion is still valuing human interactions and things that where we have a comparative advantage that is unique, and still invest time in those tasks in particular.